From this budget, there wasn't really anything specific for homeowners, but
no.
there's some little pieces of good news. What was your sort of highlight?
Absolutely, you're right. I think last year the government focused very much on affordability.
From this budget, there wasn't really anything specific for homeowners, but
no.
there's some little pieces of good news. What was your sort of highlight?
Absolutely, you're right. I think last year the government focused very much on affordability, and some of those measures did actually have an impact. We've got 5-year highs for first home buyers across the country, which is great. About 17.4% of the market is first home buyers, which is lovely. That's not to say that housing's affordable, but you know, obviously the government feels those measures have had a positive impact. There was talks that there might have been capital gains tax or negative gearing changes. That didn't happen, which is positive. And my overall take on the budget is that it feels like the economy's in quite a good place. That breeds confidence in consumers, and consumer confidence is a positive thing for the real estate market.
Now, that consumer confidence has a lot to do with interest rates as well. Do you think that this is going to have a positive or negative effect on where that's going to go?
Yeah, great question. I think that interest rates will be stable for some time. It looks like all of those fundamentals will ensure that's the case. But of course, if there is wages growth, if everything does to continue to go well, there will be some upward pressure.
Right, now to Ben Kingsley in Melbourne now, and the centrepiece of this budget was that big infrastructure spend. What sort of trickle-down effect do you think that will have for housing prices, and where will it be felt?
Yes, a great question, Sophie. I think, $24.5 billion over an overall $75 billion spending package. So where we're going to see some interesting dynamics in terms of, people and decision making around where they're going to buy their property is most likely on our major arterials and also on our rail lines. So some of the interesting stuff for me is obviously the Badgerys Creek, the Western Sydney Airport, so $5.3 billion going into that project. So I would be looking at the designing and the planning around where those rail lines are going to be, because they will be, really nice lifestyle hubs that will give you convenience to head out to that airport or to also head into the city. Same with Melbourne. We're sort of seeing the announcement for Tullamarine Airport, $5 billion to be spent there. So the question is going to be, which way is that going to run? Is it going to run through the western suburbs and hook back, or is it going to run through, say, Essendon and north sort of western suburbs as well? So there's going to be some interesting parts around that. The other things that have also caught my eye is around the sort of metro in Brisbane. It's early stages in planning stages, but I like that as a project, taking more buses off the road, quicker and easier access through that metro line. Those types of things are going to be important. And then back down in Melbourne, I also like the project that's going to connect the ring road, so the M80, which is our ring road, so from the end of that, which is Greensboro, and connecting that into the Eastern Freeway. So that will give Melbourne basically this much needed east-west link that we don't have and we should have got many, many years ago. So, they're some of the important projects, because home buyers want convenience. They want to basically, be able to get to their working environment and also have the livability of the area in which they buy. So I'd be watching those projects in terms of how they're going to impact on prices.
And can infrastructure projects ever have sort of a negative impact on prices, particularly during the construction phases? I mean, we've seen a lot of that with the WestConnex development in Sydney, where some areas did suffer a bit of a dip while all of that construction and upheaval is underway.
I think that, we all want convenience. We don't want congestion. So there is obviously that pain before there's that pleasure. But ultimately, if the long-term play is that the infrastructure project is going to deliver jobs and it's going to deliver convenience into those locations, I think you've got to lift your eyes a bit and say to yourself, I'm investing in property, or I'm buying property for the long term. I don't want to speculate in this type of thing. Property's too risky to speculate in. So for me, I would be saying it's the long-term conveniences and also the lifestyle amenity that flow from that as we get more population in those locations.
Daryl, I'm wondering, there's a pledge now for 14,000 new home care places. Does that sort of seem to contradict the idea of, older Australians living in these large homes by themselves and not moving on, will that negatively impact housing affordability and availability?
Look, we think so. We think the government doesn't clearly understand the connection between aged care, retirement living and the housing affordability equation. Certainly, the pension home loan scheme that's actually been extended this year is going to have a counter effect to that as well, and keep people in their homes. Of course, 14,000 packages in this budget, 6,000 at the MIFO at the end of last year, means only 1 in 5 people on the wait list will still get a package. Another 80,000 people are still going to be in need. That's a real concern to us as well. So there's mixed messages in here. There's not a clear understanding that the seniors want to actually stay in their own home, but they need to downsize. We need to create and free up some of that stock so that people can afford it, and also that it becomes available. And I think your point about infrastructure, it needs to be available in the right sorts of locations, which is in the city, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane.
In terms of encouraging people to downsize, like last year's budget did do that. There was tax incentives and superannuation incentives that would encourage people to get out of their bigger family homes, whereas this budget seems to be doing the opposite.
Yeah, it's crazy.
What does that do for housing stocks? I mean, shouldn't we be trying to unlock some of these bigger properties and these larger homes for families and bring ageing people into more suitable accommodation?
I absolutely agree, and we know that if you live in a retirement village, for example, you're going to be less socially isolated than if you stay at home.
Yes.
Your risk of falls is substantially reduced. Your ability to connect with the community in those villages is actually enhanced. You're likely to live a bit longer, and you're going to delay entry into a residential aged care facility for something up to 2 or 3 years. So those things are actually real drivers of better communities.
Yeah, I mean, there's a positive effect of being able to stay in your house, but if the house is, you just don't, you need more than a carer to deal with a 4-bedroom house and a big yard if you're of a certain age. And that lifestyle thing that you're talking about, living in a community, is something that people do feel isolated.
Absolutely. And isolation's happening more and more, particularly in suburbs where gentrification takes place. Our older Australians are actually left behind. The younger Australians who are moving in are at work during the day, so there's far less social connection. Older Australians also have their neighbours of many years actually moving on, and that creates more isolation as we go through, as those suburbs actually develop.
And really interesting point that you make about the fact that it delays going into the actual aged care or into the nursing home if they're in the over 55s, if they're getting that care. It delays that. That's really interesting. I'm going to take that home to Mum and Dad tomorrow.
We were having that conversation before,
we
so
were,
we'll be sending the report through.
In that space right now. Thank you. I'll look forward to it.
How does the REI New South Wales feel about that sort of contradiction within the budget?
Yeah, I mean, what can you do? It does seem crazy. I understand from the government's perspective, it is actually cheaper for people to stay at home. That's what's driving them. But yeah, you're right. Last year it was a completely opposite sort of focus. We understand the need to actually encourage people to move on, free up those bigger family homes for people with children. You know, you just need to look at downsizing.